Epicurus' advice about pain is as follows. He says that bodily pains are either short or ignorable. If they're intense, they tend to not last long. Say a migraine, those are terrible, but they tend to be over within, say, an hour or less, at least most people's. And other pains, say sore muscles, back pain, tends to be ignorable. You just kind of get used to it. I actually once knew a lady who had migraines more or less constantly, and she actually got used to those, interestingly enough. She was a perfectly pleasant person. About mental pains, he says that these can be cured or avoided just by thinking the right things, cultivating certain kinds of memories and certain kinds of interests, letting go of other kinds of desires, and we'll see more what this involves as we move through his philosophy. The goal of Epicurus' philosophy is for you to get ataraxia, that's the Greek word, which we could translate peace of mind or mental tranquility. This is a passive pleasure. It's a pleasure you don't get by doing something. It's a pleasure that just sort of happens. Controversially, Epicurus says that this is the highest degree or best kind of pleasure. When we achieve this, we've avoided all pain and anguish. He says, quote, all the soul's storm is dispelled. And, quote, when we are not in pain, we no longer have need of pleasure. That is, need of active pleasures, pleasures other than this. So ataraxia is a total lack of pain, mental or physical, and this is the practical goal at which his philosophy aims. A happy life, then, is a life characterized by the best pleasure, which is peace of mind. Epicurus is then recommending pleasure, absolutely. A happy life is a life with best kind of pleasure. He absolutely does not recommend partying. He doesn't recommend pursuing anything but the most simple desires. He thinks you should desire food and water and friendship. He absolutely doesn't think that you should drink a lot, do drugs, go to parties. And the reason for this is he just thinks it, on the whole, decreases your happiness. While you're getting high, there's a momentary fun there. But of course, the next morning, you've got that hangover headache. And you also may find that you did embarrassing things when you were drunk. You may find that you hooked up with somebody that you really shouldn't have. And he thinks that if you look at a party lifestyle long term, it's just completely foolish. It's not at all in your self-interest to really pursue those types of pleasures. So he's against what you could call a rock star lifestyle, not exactly for moral reasons, but just for reasons of prudence. He thinks this will not serve your purposes. This will not, in the long term, maximize your pleasures. Epicurus offers his disciples a four-part cure. The first part is that you should not fear any god or gods. When you first see this, it makes Epicurus sound like an atheist, but he's not an atheist in the modern sense. He actually does acknowledge that the traditional Greek gods exist. And the reason that he acknowledges this is that he's what we call nowadays an empiricist. An empiricist is somebody who thinks that in some sense all human knowledge is based in experience. Usually sense experience is the main thing people have in mind, but possibly other types of experience too. So all knowledge is based on human experience. The thing is, people, as far as we can tell, experience the gods, particularly in dreams or visions. Consequently, we can't say that there aren't any gods because we have these reports. And he seems to think of gods as these material objects with bodies that are much like human bodies, and they are roughly as the legends say. Epicurus accepts the traditional Greek idea that the gods themselves are truly well off, they're truly happy or blessed, and because of that they're unconcerned with what happens on earth. Epicurus thinks, like current-day atheists think many times, that if you look at the world, there's too much evil in it to think that it came from a perfect being. And also, if you lay aside the concept of a monotheistic God, he also just thinks there's too much chanciness. People who serve the gods sometimes meet a terrible fate, and wicked people sometimes live these long and fulfilled lives. He just doesn't believe in any sort of what you can call divine providence. He doesn't believe that there's any reason to think that gods get involved in the world. And again, he thinks if you look at the world, it just doesn't seem to involve providence. There's There's too much chance involved in people's fates. So the gods do exist, but they're not going to get you if you're naughty in this life. And even if they wanted to, they couldn't get you in the next life, as there is no next life, as we'll see. And his second point is that you should not fear death. He gives a famous argument about this, which we'll look at shortly. Third part of the cure is that you should know that what we actually need is easy to get. What you really need for happiness is just friendship and wisdom. What you need for life and comfort are really very simple, and it's very unlikely that you could be deprived of those things, nor do you need to trouble yourself really pursuing those things. And as to the things that people pursue, like cars and fine clothes and power and money, well, you just don't need to pursue those things. And fourth, what makes us suffer is easy to put up with. So physical pain and even mental pain can be gotten rid of. Physical pain can be overcome by right thinking, by just the pleasure of people's company and friendship, and by cultivating good memories. And mental pain can be done away with by thinking the right thoughts. Elaborating on the third point of the four-part cure, some of the things that people really wrap their lives up in, according to Epicurus, are not worth it. One of those is politics. He really disrecommends politics. Think about the last presidential election. There are always images on TV of voters crying, weeping, moaning, acting like somebody has died just because their candidate has lost. And of course, before the election, there's all kinds of anxiety, all kinds of work. Nope, just not worth it. Better to just disengage and pursue those basic needs, according to Epicurus. Another thing, as I mentioned, that he thinks is not worth the trouble is sex. For a couple of reasons. One reason is that sex leads to children, and children are the source of countless worries and troubles. Another thing about sex is that it leads to close bonding between people, and you can get your heart broken. And I don't know that he says this explicitly, but he might say this. Sex is extremely habit forming. Once you get a taste for it, you feel like you can't live without it. But truly, nobody ever died for lack of sex. Nobody ever wasted away and died at a young age. Epicurus then agrees with countless Christian or Buddhist monks and nuns who have just totally renounced sex. Is this radical? Yes, it is. Epicurus once said, "Sexual intercourse never did anyone any good, and a man is lucky if it has not harmed him. Family life, not to be pursued." You can't entirely avoid it. You're going to have brothers and sisters, parents, and so on, but you shouldn't devote yourself to it. Epicurus doesn't say this explicitly, but I think if you talked about a desire for family togetherness, that would be a natural and unnecessary desire. It's really, on his views, not necessary for either happiness, comfort, or life. Is this radical? Yes, it is. It's incredibly radical, and you might run for the doors at this point. But if you really think that the only good is pleasure, the only intrinsic good is pleasure, and you really think that the highest form of pleasure is peace of mind, you might be willing to pay this price to get that. Many people have made that call. In the next segment, we will look at Epicurus' famous argument that death is irrelevant. As he says, death is nothing to us.